So it's such a paradox that though what's that Grand Inquisitor is supposed to be his last novel, the question raised in this particular chapter or implicated in this particular chapter has an answer in a sinister answer, I should say, in his earlier novel. Again, very disturbing, at the same time fascinating. That is Possessed or Demons.
Right.
Now, my next question concerns the logical suicide of Kirillov that occurs in the same novel. To quote his words, "I shall kill myself in order to assert my insubordination, my new and dreadful liberty." In other words, what he is trying to say is, this is my revolt against God. For I believe if God does not exist, then I am God. Kirillov even fancies that for a moment Jesus at his death did not find himself in paradise, and when he found out the truth, then that this torture has been useless. But Christ died on the cross nevertheless, which makes him the complete man, for Christ realized the most absurd condition. But Kirillov also has the realization that God does not and cannot exist. This is the kind of realization that the priest from the plague goes through when Dr. Ryu makes the Jesuit priest witness the acute agony of a child suffering from the plague. I am talking about Albert Camus' greatest novel, The Plague. And Dr. Ryu's ultimate question, to which the Jesuit priest has no answer, is, what sin do you think the child has committed? Right? Why the God punishing the child if he really exists? I guess to sum up in a few words, Kirillov's argument is more or less the same. The world is far from perfect and makes zero sense, and that triples my suffering. Therefore, I shall take my own life, for this is how I exercise my will to power. Kirillov is bound to show the world that man's supreme freedom lies in negation, to prove that one can end his life having no desire either for immortal glory that has been preached or the earthly elusive absurd fulfillments. In other words, he commits suicide because it is his idea, because he is vexed. He is vexed because he knows God is necessary and that he must exist, God must exist. But he also knows that he does not, God does not exist and cannot exist.
So, can we speak on that?
Yeah. Just as we found a philosophical crime in Crime and Punishment, here is a philosophical suicide, because this is also based on what the individual feels is a very rational kind of explanation, which makes suicide obligatory. Kirillov is almost like a 20th century existentialist, beginning with the first initial statement that this existence is absurd, okay, and there is no God. So the issue would be, how do I exercise my willpower? If there is no God, then I have autonomy, then I have absolute personal freedom of choice. Then how do I demonstrate it? And the extreme way in which he wants to demonstrate it, his individual freedom, is by committing suicide, because he says that if I want to put an end to my existence, and if that power rests with me, then, as you were saying, it's almost like a godlike power. We believe that it's the will of God which either creates you or destroys you. And if I can, the birth was not my option or choice, but if I can erase my own existence, then I become godlike. This is the intellectual framework that he has built, and he does that, in the sense he agrees to do that, but of course it is in a way manipulated also, because the whole novel is about a small group of nihilists, especially led by Stavrogin, the son of the local, she is the aristocratic woman who has been supporting Stefan, who is the old world liberal, and then there is also Pyotr who comes back, Peter or Pyotr, and Pyotr is the one who does everything. Whereas Stavrogin seems to be a far more dissipated, fragmented, probably a mysterious character who has been into all kinds of things. But even Peter says that he is the guru, and he is the one who has been an inspiration. And in one of the books I was reading on Dostoevsky, the critic went to the extent of saying that there is a fluidity of identity between companions, male companions, in the sense it's almost like your identity merges with the other. That's what Peter is trying to say. Peter's defense in a way is that it's all Stavrogin who created this circle, and he is supposed to be in touch with the international forces, etc., etc. is the motivating factor. Actually, in the novel itself, it is Pyotr who organizes the events and then creates that pandemonium in the small provincial town, and he is the one who is the most active of the small group, and he is the one who takes charge of it. Whereas Stavrogin is someone who floats in and floats out, but he is supposed to be in a way the intellectual source of all this, you see. And in the midst of this, because they suspect Shatov, one of the members of the club, the group is known as the club, and deliberately, it's not true, because Shatov is a very compassionate and a very honest person who wouldn't let down his companions, but this kind of a rumor is created among the club members that Shatov may let them down and betray them, and therefore it's necessary to kill him, and there are some other murders also which are planned. And once again, what we see is these crimes are not even political in the real sense, but the justification given is that they may ultimately lead to a political change. If we disturb and create this kind of a riotous situation, disturbing all the existing social relations and structures, maybe a space will be created for our own very utilitarian and pragmatic society. And I think it is absurd, and in the context of the narrative also, it looks ridiculous, and it does not seem to be true at all. But unfortunately, very unfortunately, these actions are real, and a small provincial society is victimized, and a lot of violence also takes place, you see. The mentally deranged person is killed, her brother is killed, and then the woman who is suspected to be responsible, she is not responsible. She is also lynched by the mob, and one whole part of the town or the city is also set to fire. So Dostoevsky is packing in all these details, which look so very naturalistic actually, in order to probably defend his position that this is what can happen. And one of that is Kirillov's action, which has for him a philosophical basis, saying that I have power, I have autonomy, I have freedom, and this is something I can exhibit and demonstrate only by taking away my own life, and he does that. But this is manipulated by the group, because they can blame everything on him.
And he is aware of that. Right?
Yes, he is aware of it.
Yeah, I think in that process, he more or less ends up becoming a sort of absurd god of indifference. For example, through indifference, he lets his suicide be used to the advantage of a cause he despises. The treacherous plot that involves the murder of the liberal Shatov. And Kirillov chooses not to care, although he has soft feelings toward Shatov and his uncontaminated happiness.
I think if you take it along with other such episodes in the fiction of Dostoevsky, Dostoevsky is the exploring the demonic power of reason and rationality also, because it seems to overcome all other compunctions of friendship and companionship and your own bonds with your companions. If it can do that, if it can erase all those delicate bonds between human beings, I would like to place it in a larger context, as many Dostoevsky critics have done, because exactly after his return from the penal experience and then the exile, Dostoevsky confronted this, a young generation which Turgenev also had dealt with in Fathers and Sons, which was not happy with the reforms and the end of serfdom, etc., but they wanted very radical changes. And for these radical changes, they had accepted a very utilitarian, materialist sort of socialism, believing that if you create those social conditions, then there will be equality and human beings will never take to evil once you have the right social conditions. Now, Dostoevsky's problem was that he didn't believe in it. He said, you can't have only such a contextual or a social and a materialist kind of framework to judge human beings. There are many other things which are there in human beings. And the greater worry was, okay, even if it's a false utopian ideology, no problem with that. But once you take that utopian ideology as a permission to aggress upon human beings, do violence to them and kill human beings. These are, he went by an incident where a student leader of such a group had done that by killing a companion. Maybe critics could even argue, historians could say, the situation had not reached that extreme point in Russia at that time. What Dostoevsky is looking at is that the seeds have been sown, So, as many contemporary critics do, I would like to place Dostoevsky in the critique of certain enlightenment values when they are exaggerated. He is not an anti-intellectualist, and I don't consider him as an anti-reason also. But he is trying to understand the severe limitations of rationality, and if it becomes an instrumental rationality and a means of aggression in your political action, what would happen to the human world?
And also, Kirillov rejects the idea of killing others to exercise one's own power as the most weakest kind of display of power. This man Kirillov, being so free and indifferent, could have enjoyed maximum freedom on earth as long as he is alive. He could have led his life like czars. Still, he chooses the difficult road of suffering, for he wants to show the other human beings the royal paths of glory. He wants to teach them a way. Like as Albert Camus declares in Myth of Sisyphus, Kirillov's death is a pedagogical suicide.
Yes. It's an excellent phrase that Camus uses. As I said earlier, I think it's very clear that Dostoevsky doesn't look at these nihilists as, born evil. He doesn't look at them, from that perspective. He feels that they are misled, intellectually misled. That I think is what he's trying to say.